السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يعني احنا عارفين كويس قوي ان مصر في الفترة الحالية محتاجة انها تعضد من موقفها السياسي وتعضد من موقفها الاقتصادي. اذا كنا عايزين نخرج من الازمات اللي احنا موجودين فيها فاحنا محتاجين الكثير من الدعم يكون موجود من الاصدقاء او حتى من الناس اللي بيننا وبينهم خلافات. لازم يكون في حالة من حالات التوافق طالما الموضوع لا يطغى على المبادئ الأساسية اللي بتتبعها مصر في التعامل في قضاياها الحيوية وقضاياها الخاصة بمصير الشعب المصري. فبالتالي احنا تابعنا الفترة اللي فاتت عدد من الزيارات الكبيرة اللي كان بيعملها الرئيس السيسي إلى الخارج، وبنتابع زيارات أيضا تأتي من زعماء العالم للداخل. لكن القضية مش بس زعماء ورؤساء ان هم يكونوا موجودين وملوك، احنا بنتكلم على سياسيين واقتصاديين لما بيكونوا في بلدنا او لما بنلتقي بيهم بيبقى مهم جدا اننا نعرف هم شايفين مصر ازاي، ونسألهم ونتحاور معاهم في الخطوات اللي جاية، ازاي نعبر الفترة اللي جاية، ازاي نوثق العلاقات، هم شايفيننا ازاي، وازاي نغير الصورة لو كانت سلبية موجودة عندنا. موجود في مصر في خلال هذا الأسبوع كونغرسمان جيف فولتنبري، وهو من أعضاء الكونجرس الأمريكي اللي ليهم اهتمامات في قضايا مهمة جدا. بقاله فترة طويلة جدا عضو في الكونجرس. هو كان حتى وهو طالب في الجامعة كان جه عاش في مصر في فترة، فهو عارف مصر من أواخر السبعينات، ثم جاء في زيارات تالية. اهتماماته جوه الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وهو ممثل عن ولاية نبراسكا، اهتماماته الأساسية ترتبط بالأسرة في الولايات المتحدة، وأن الأسرة هي الأساس اللي عليه تقوم الولايات المتحدة وتصبح دولة قوية. نفس الحكاية لو احنا فكرنا ان احنا وضعنا الاجتماعي هنا في مصر هو قوة مصر، فهنا ممكن يكون في ارتباط موجود له صلة بلجنة الزراعة في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية في الكونجرس، فبالتالي أيضا هناك موضوعات من الممكن الحديث عنها، ولكن الحديث دائما ما يبدأ من عند السياسة. I'm welcoming you, Congressman Fortenberry.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here with you. أنا مبسوط هنا.
Okay. We're very happy to have you here. So this is not your first visit to Egypt, as I was just explaining to our audience. It dates back to the late 1970s when you were first here. How often did you come afterwards? I heard you were here in 2007?
Yes, this is my fourth visit to Egypt.
Okay.
I've been here 3 times since being in Congress. It's been a while since my last visit, but I can tell you the early one, when I was a much younger man, was quite extraordinary. A real gift to me from the Egyptian people. I lived with 10 families throughout the region, from the wealthiest, most accomplished, to the poorest, with farmers. Had shropshey in the Bedouin tent, planted trees in the Sinai as a part of an international work project. Just an extraordinarily inviting environment at that time, particularly because it was during the year the peace accords were signed, and America's and Egypt's relationship was so strong and proximate and good. It was a real formative time. In fact, I've made the comment, since this was my first international experience, I consider Egypt to be, in a certain sense, like my mother, you helped raise me.
Okay, so I remember also that particular timing and how Egyptians embraced the American thoughts and ideas, and how the U.S. aid at first started back at the time, and we had what we used to call, I mean, the aid things. I remember we used to have autobuset Carter, that is Carter buses, because these were American aid buses. We even had Carter's thighs, and these were chickens. Thighs. So, but they were called Carter's thighs at the time.
This is interesting because I had not heard that, but people would stop and kiss me on the street and tell me I look just like Jimmy Carter.
Okay.
It's a way of conferring a compliment.
All right, and then you came back afterwards, after you became a congressman.
Yes.
I think, when was that, 2007?
I was in Sharm el-Sheikh for a World Economic Forum. I believe that was in 2008. And in proximate to that was here on another trip in which we had come through the Middle East, met with the parliament and a number of legislators at that time, President Mubarak, to talk about some of the dynamics in the country.
Right, and then you came again, I think, in 2011.
I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the exact years.
Around the time,
Yes,
after the 25th of January revolution, you
no, I have not been here since.
You have not been here?
I have not been here. So this is my first trip since, yes.
After it all started.
Correct.
So how do you see it? I mean, along those years, like you're talking about 35 years,
right.
And you've seen Egypt, you've just called it or a mother, back in the late 1970s. How do you see it now with all the turbulences within Egypt and in the region?
Well, the traffic is much worse, I can tell you that. But this is an indication, though, of ongoing development and movement toward more prosperity for more people. Mm-hmm. I lived near here in Tahrir Square for a portion of my time, and used to grab the bus myself and crowd in, sometimes holding on with one hand and one foot in the door just to get a ride. So I had the experience at street level. I'm very gratified and fortunate to be a member of the United States Congress, and of course that gives me the privilege and the responsibility to help lead and to interact with your leadership. But my first early experiences were on the street with the people. The society has very much progressed in terms of the modern development of economic goods. That is very, very clear. It has expanded greatly as the population has expanded. The number of high-rises and hotel developments as well as housing has greatly expanded. I asked a question one day when I was here in the first visit. I said, why are the buildings not complete on the top? And it has to do with taxes and other phenomena, as I understand it. So I've seen an enormous amount of change in about the last 40 years of the development of society. And then, of course, you mix in that with what has happened politically and the dynamics of how to shape Egyptian society from a security perspective, promote economic development and prosperity, while moving toward robust human rights and those considerations that are consistent with democratic ideals and values. All of these things are now part of the ongoing mix of Egyptian society. So all of this that is very different than the conversation almost 40 years ago, which was more about the geopolitical strategic relationship for which Egypt very much sacrificed, losing President Sadat, being very courageous in signing a peace accord with Israel, allowing and inviting and leveraging appropriately so our leadership to help broker that deal, all of which have enormous strategic implications that are still with us today. It's one of the things that I've reminded my colleagues of, particularly in the last 5 years, that the stability of Egypt is absolutely essential to international security. That even though at times it's been a cold peace, nonetheless there is a roadmap for peace in the Middle East. And it happened because of the sacrificial leadership of 3 countries in 1979. So that was the early context for my visit, and that continues to be the foundation of my own feeling, disposition toward the potential for the United States and Egyptian relationship.
Perfect. Now, with all the changes that have happened, and we are living in a completely different world right now. The whole world is different, the whole region is different, the whole Egypt is different, the whole US is different. We're not the same. We're not the same peoples. We're not the same. The only thing that remains, maybe, and not for all of us, is the geography. Not for all countries, of course. How do you see this progressing in the coming period? I know you've met with MPs yesterday over dinner, and you had a very positive note in speaking to them about looking at the future. However, we need to look at the present as well in order to be able to achieve what we want in the future. How do you see that?
Well, if you categorize Egypt's challenge, and really it's the challenge of any society at large, it's security, economic, and then what I call a values proposition. Regarding security, that is an internal question as well as an external question. The neighborhood in which Egypt sits is in deep turmoil, as we all know. I think Egypt must play a substantive role and be repositioned to rightfully gain its leadership role that it has traditionally held in the Arab world, not only as a cultural and population center, but as a leader in terms of geopolitical outcomes. I want to see that happen. I think this is very important. However, for that to happen, the internal reforms, the internal self-analysis, as your president has rightly called for, I believe, in the last few months, has to take place. And that means a recommitment to a healthy form of nationalism, the proper participation in the government and reform process, and accepting of the ideas that some types of economic reform are going to have to take place in order for there to be potential economic prosperity in the future. And all of this lends itself, again, to that third point, the deeper values question. What is a society truly made of in order to answer where are we going, which was your initial question. It's this idea of human dignity, that each person matters, each person belongs, and we should set up our governance structures to ensure that there is justice for all, that there are the protection of rights, that the concept of pluralism, which is very unique in Egypt, particularly in regards to the rest of the Middle East, and isn't under the same type of distress as it is in the Middle East, is not only preserved, but celebrated. I would point out something. Don't think it went unnoticed when President Sisi went on television with the Grand Imam and Pope Tewodros and said we are all Egyptians. Very important statement.
That was on the 3rd of July 2013. And that's the date where the U.S. remains, the U.S. administration, I'd say, remained very hesitant and indecisive, and it took them quite a while. I always use the statement of, at the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but we will remember the silence of our friends. Do you think that 18 months, perhaps it was, of total, utter silence and almost a boycott from the U.S. administration to Egypt has affected the Egyptian-American relations in terms of those people out on the street that used to kiss you on the cheeks? If you go down the street right now as an American, do you think they will still kiss you on the cheeks?
Well, there's two issues there. I just came from your market in Kana Khalili. I wanted to see it again, and people were very friendly. Of course, these are merchants who depend upon their livelihood being very friendly. But it seemed to me to be authentic and genuine. However, I would also be hesitant to walk out on the street because of security considerations. The deeper issue here is, there's two issues to your question. One is the general response from the United States during that particular period, difficult period of uncertainty, and there being a hitting of the pause button on the relationship because of the military's intervention to try to prevent further disorder or chaos or even potential collapse, and how that appeared in terms of a grab for power or whether it was the necessity for stabilization. So in the broad sense of the circumstance, the pause on the development of the relationship is understandable. Now, I will tell you, because of my own experience in Egypt, that I had personally advocated for a continuation, particularly of the military-to-military relationship shortly thereafter, because I saw this more through the lens of needing to stop the chaos and disorder, because even though the Middle East has many, many sore spots at the moment, particularly Syria and Iraq and even Turkey and of course other places, can you imagine the collapse of Egyptian society? Its population.
Well, it looked at the time like the administration did not really mind. I remember because I used to talk on television about the Apaches and the
right, but I'm talking to you about my own personal view.
Your personal view.
And how I, again, in my role, was advocating. So I'm trying to explain why, in a general American policy sense, even though I didn't develop it myself, the uncertainty caused the pause, and then what I personally did because of knowing the situation a little bit more proximately, having had experience here. So it looks to me like we're moving past that. There are concerns that, there are still concerns in this regard, and they've been expressed to me very vociferously by your leadership, and that's understandable. I think, though, that the development of the military-to-military relationship, or the ongoing development of it, has to be rooted in mutual understanding and trust, fellowship, if you will, then we develop the necessary transactions. And all of this happens at once and simultaneously. And because if you're only negotiating this or that piece of equipment, you're not refreshing that initial values proposition, which is so important to the tie, and then we're not potentially strengthening it. So that's what I want to see.
That's the military to military, and it's quite important. And I believe this was not as negatively affected as the rest of the relations.
Yes.
And this is why I started my question with how the layman feels. I know that Egypt is part of a small region, not in the maximum interests of the US. Asia Pacific is probably more interesting now to the US administration, looking at countries surrounding Russia and Europe and the changes happening there. So Egypt is not that much of a priority. But it could be very easily that you win again the sentiments of Egyptians, or it could have been not so difficult to lose the sentiments of the Egyptian people. How do you think the future can, I mean, you having elections coming up, you're either having a Republican administration or another Democrat administration. And we stand in one of those rare moments where we don't really know who would side with us as Egyptians or us as Arabs. And I'm not talking now as government, I'm talking as people. How do you see it?
I don't think we should take the relationship that we have with Egypt for granted. I don't think Egyptians should take the relationship they have with America for granted. Mm-hmm. In other words, there is a solid foundation here that was built after a war, based upon sacrifice, that has held. It's had its tough spots, it's had its cold moments, but it has held. The responsibility is both ways in terms of fellowship, friendship, mutual trust. So the new model moving forward, I would like to see is, again, an elevation of Egypt's essential role in the Middle East. Not only in terms of your effort to secure things internally here and develop sound governance structures and develop out civil society for the protection of rights, but also that leadership role that you have traditionally played in the region. President Sisi has offered a peace plan. Mm-hmm. It's hardly translated. It's not seen. The other comments that have been made...
It was not supported as well. Nobody has taken it seriously in order to support it and put it into action.
So there's two issues. Does Egypt now have a stature because of all of the internal turmoil? Because it has not branded itself any longer? Because the necessary hard reforms about recreating a robust society are in process or haven't yet been fulfilled. And so the demand that there be that level of respect without working toward it creates a certain distance, if you will, or Egypt is not, as you've suggested, not as big of a priority. I think it should be a priority. I think the relationship is sound on many levels. I think it should be revived, replenished, and refreshed. And Egypt should be empowered, first, again, by your own internal resolve to the reforms of society to reposition itself as a leadership position. Again, back to the point, can you imagine, again, taking Egypt for granted, can you imagine an Egypt that becomes highly unstable or even volatile? This would be horribly problematic for international stability, our own national security as well as other people.
So how come, I mean, I could see your own personal initiative and the initiative of some of the other honorable congressmen and senators who've been to Egypt and visited Egypt and tried to strengthen economic ties with Egypt, because right now we know that the major issue we're facing is economic and then security, not the other way around. So how come the administration is not looking at ways in terms of discussing with Egyptians means of trying to overcome the present hurdles in terms of the economic difficulty to get out of it?
Yeah. Well, it's my understanding that you're in a very intense negotiation with the IMF about structural economic reforms.
But IMF is not U.S. administration, or it's become part of it, or what?
No, it's not U.S. administration,
yet.
but nonetheless, we all depend upon these types of transparency in terms of economic structure in order for there to be the right type of reforms. In our own economic aid package, there is a request that we allow that money potentially to be leveraged as part of the package of IMF reform. So there's an interrelationship there.
Congressman, I'm not looking for a political answer. I'm actually looking at, I'm telling you how people feel out on the street. It's a matter of, they know that we have a financial crisis. They know we have an economic problem. And they would look at who will be there in order to support. We're not talking about somebody just pumping in money. We're talking about somebody, for example, opening markets for Egyptian exports, or helping some of these ideas that used to happen back in the 1980s and 90s pretty well before things got cold during the Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration. Where is the United States?
Okay, but I won't give you a political answer.
Okay.
Is Egypt willing to embrace the internal reforms that will create the conditions for long-term prosperity and therefore make the investment very inviting, not only by the United States, by private market entities, as well as other foreign partners? I think that's the dance, the delicate dance here. I think it is. You are looking, don't look to us to save you. You're not. I know
We're
you're not
not
saying
looking
that.
at you to save us.
But you're saying do something. You must do something. And I think the finger comes back the other way and saying, it's the will to reform there. Now, I'm not here to lecture you or anybody else who's watching this program. All I'm doing is, as an observer of the current conditions, and participating in a process in which we together try to find these hard answers. That means, like in any family, you have to say sometimes hard things to one another.
Certainly, that's very well understood, but it's an issue of all these advices, like the ones we've heard from Mrs. Clinton back in 2011 and 2012 when she was Secretary of State.
Yeah.
And then you look at her and you say, come on, practice what you preach. Today, we see that her longtime aide has become the editor-in-chief of an Islamist magazine. And then you say, how come you've been preaching us and you have been breaching there? So you can't preach and breach at the same time. Of course, the reforms that are needed, like human rights and democracy and so on, isn't it a long process?
And economic reforms.
And economic reforms, of course. But I mean, these are the ones, I mean, democracy and human rights are the ones that have been the focus of the U.S. advice to Egypt. And now the economic reforms, and definitely you can see the strides that Egypt is trying to take because there's no alternative to it. It's not a matter of we're telling you help, but we're just thinking in terms of in 10 years' time when this is all over, we will definitely look at who's been there and who is absent, don't you think?
Why am I having this conversation with you?
I don't know, because you're here, not
Because-
absent.
Because I'm here.
Will you run for U.S. president?
You have to call my wife.
Okay.
It's a fair set of questions, but the premise of your question is there's two premises working in your question. The first of all, the challenges that you are throwing at me are indications of a desire for a deeper relationship. And I think that is good. The second premise, though...
Actually, I'm not throwing anything at you. I'm just following your model that you gave of let's look at tomorrow, not today. So I'm just trying to look at tomorrow.
The second premise is you must do something. I think the new architecture in the 21st century of international relations with Egypt, the United States, and all countries is, again, a values proposition that suggests what type of governance structure and societal order are going to come about, that is based upon human dignity, so that people can feel safe, protected, have lives that they can use their own gifts of their own two hands and their intellect to make things prosper, and to live in harmony with their neighbor. That's the reality of the architecture where we need to go in international affairs. Not transactional relationships. The transactional relationship should flow forth from, again, shared value and shared trust. Both can work together, and I think that's the dance here. The other thing you presume is that administrations or certain people in administration do certain things. I can't control that. I can control what I can control. I don't speak fully for America here. Certain American policies are not reflective of my own view. My own view, though, is what I've laid out to you. I think the relationship has a solid foundation. It has drifted, particularly of late. It ought to be revived. We are in intense negotiations with military-to-military exchange, which is a part of the foundation of that relationship. I would love to see, again, if I walked out of here on the street, people kissing me on the cheek. That is a longer process, though, of building trust, but it also is a dialogue that must come from Egypt itself, that reaches out to the world and says, here's who we are, here's our brand.
Okay, and when I give your wife a call in order to ask for you running for president, I'll ask her if I can kiss you on the cheek.
Fair enough.
But I mean, the dance, I mean, I love this image of the dance. I'll take you outside of Egypt for a bit. The American dance with Turkey has really gone foul, hasn't it? You caught them dancing with somebody else, or they caught you giving them your back. What happened?
It's very sad.
Sad dance.
Sad, divergent state of affairs. Very sad.
And now Mr. Erdogan is the one preaching, and he's lecturing you on what democracy is all about. And I'm really surprised that the U.S. is taking it like a first wife and accepting all the beating that's coming from Mr. Erdogan. How come?
Well, the relationship with Turkey is long and it's historic, and it's...
Since 1952, when you started the Incirlik base, and then NATO.
And there are certain dependencies there. However, how long will the American people take, spit in the face? I'm not sure. This is a political problem as is playing out in our own election. Kind of back to what we were talking about. What is America going to do for Egypt? Well, there's a great deal of fatigue in America over international engagement. And international engagement on our part can be criticized. I take that. However, people whisper to me, you're the superpower, you must help, and then turn around in public, use the animus or hatred toward us for their own political benefit. No more. See, I have a job to do at home as well, to tell my people why we spend their money on people very far away.
Absolutely.
And what I explain is it's three reasons. First of all, it's very hard for Americans to sit idly by while other people suffer and die. It's not part of our values, it's not who we are. Secondly, we do benefit when we exchange with you and with others, economically and culturally. And third is, even if you don't accept the first two, all of this is critical to international stability and ultimately our own national security. Now, the deeper question, though, is again the architecture of where we're going in the 21st century as humanity. Are we going to build out sustainable economic and political systems that are based upon human dignity and where power is held accountable and people have a chance to have their lives flourish in a sustainable type of economic model, or not?
Doesn't look likely.
Well, but I think we hold out that vision of what ought to be so that it becomes the new standard.
So I'll use your term of Turkey spitting in the face of the administration. How about Iran? I mean, what happened? I mean, all of a sudden, things are working. You have some guarantees that they're not going to build a nuclear bomb. But because of that, you're taking the beating again as a first wife who has to accept what the Iranians are doing. You pay ransoms, your Navy people get caught and humiliated, and you're giving the impression that this is the way you should be treated, like what the Iranians are doing and what the Turks are doing. While if the Egyptians are doing it the other way around, or the Saudis, you just don't get the right treatment. Why is that?
I would say this regarding the Iran question. The ill treatment of our sailors has more lasting impact than this murky transaction that took place. The administration is claiming that, no, this wasn't some hostage buy. It was, we owed this, we were going to give it anyway, we might as well use it to get people out. Okay, that's the explanation. It's not coming from me, it's coming from others. But leave that aside. The humiliation of Navy personnel should never happen. That has a long-term political impact, perhaps more so than the other question, because it shows deep disrespect. We're just like anybody else. We don't want to be disrespected.
So
now, I did not...
We don't want you to be disrespected.
Yeah, I did not, in all candor and all forthrightness, I did not vote for the Iran nuclear deal. Now, I also, though, was in a little bit different position, that I refused to be dismissive of the attempt to find some type of deal. However, the lifting of ballistic missile technology and other weapon systems agreements was, I thought that was inappropriate, and now we see what's happened. So I didn't support that. Again, back to the question, you have to help answer this. What is the Middle East going to look like in 30 years? What role does Egypt play? Will it turn inward and be insular and continue to deal with all of the carryover stagnation from decades past? Or will it revive itself through a hard self-analysis that the President has called for, and then in turn be repositioned to build that trust with external partners so that reinvestment can take place? I think that's your challenge.
Don't you think that the challenge of the 21st century and the years to come, the remaining years of the 21st century, will be dealing with terrorism, dealing with fanaticism, much more than it was in the last 20 years of the 20th century? And we could see that this is heading where it reached lands that it had never reached. I mean, we see it in Europe now extensively happening. We've seen it before in the US. We don't want to see it again in the US. We don't want to see it again in Europe. We don't want to see it at home. But looks like the world is sitting idle and sometimes encouraging that more of these would happen, sometimes under the pretext of human rights, sometimes under the pretext of moderate opposition in Syria, and all the time we're just opening doors for armed men to penetrate our societies in Nebraska, or in my hometown, Alexandria in Egypt, or somewhere in a small village in Germany or in France or in Nice or whatever it is. Why is this happening?
Well, I think to potentially allow someone in your country who's going to do you harm is absolutely outrageous. And there is an internal debate going on in the United States as to what our immigration policy is going to be and how people who want to come to the United States are going to be appropriately vetted. We have a long history of immigration. But if your values tell you that you can kill another person in the name of your religion, you're not welcome. In fact, do not come there, or I assume here. That's your values as well. In fact, that's no religion at all. That's a death cult.
Certainly.
So this is one of the greatest challenges. Can I go a little deeper on your question? Because I think we can make it simple and put it in 3 terms. The challenges are security, economic, and what I call family. And I want to get to the 3rd one quickly. Regarding security, I think there are 2 challenges. One, you just stated very well. This concept, this asymmetric warfare. Warfare used to be against them over there behind a particular line with a different color uniform. Not so much anymore. The world is quickly adjusting to that, particularly after 9/11. However, the United States, particularly after World War II, had this superpower status cast upon us. And there was great sacrifice offered by America, both in terms of economics as well as the lost lives, to combat ideologies, not always perfectly, but combat ideologies around the world so that other people could enjoy the liberties we have and we could remain safe. The United States cannot carry this burden alone, nor should we carry the burden alone anymore.
No one
should. We have to have
alone.
Responsible partners joining us in the name of creating the conditions for international stability. The second issue in this regards is the possibility of nuclear proliferation worldwide. The containment of the technology gets harder and harder, particularly as nuclear power spreads. This is an existential problem for humanity. And look at just the reactor gone bad due to an unpredictable tsunami in Japan with the world's greatest, best, smartest engineers. and there is confusion as to how to handle this. This is very dangerous. Regarding economic security, it's back to that point I just made. What does a sustainable economy look like? Where everyone is given the chance and opportunity, has the conditions in which the society is stable enough where they can pursue their ideas, their dreams, and actually power structures are committed to the individual's person's dream, pursuit. The third is related to that, what I call family security.
When I was doing the introduction in Arabic about you, I said that you are the person who's upholding the family values as the source of creating a very powerful or a great United States of America.
Or a great Egypt. The strength of the nation depends upon the strength of family and community. And from there, the communities that are built out around this idea that we live in an ecosystem. We are interdependent upon one another. I take responsibility for myself. If I've been given the gift of bringing life into the world with my spouse, I have a responsibility to those children to bring them up as best they can. And then a responsibility to my neighbor, who I then can hold accountable when they may be going beyond the lines as to what is just and good for themselves. That's the proper order of things. That will bring about human flourishing and human happiness. We're chasing all kinds of other things in the material world to make us happy, but that's the core value, where people feel nested and protected and loved. That's the strength of a nation.
Who are you voting for?
Well, I was hopeful that we wouldn't get into the dynamics of the presidential election in America here, because I'm on international TV and you're home. I'm not asking you who you're going to vote for in the next election.
In the Egyptian election?
Right.
No, I can tell you.
Here's what I'll say about that. I'm a Republican, and so I am obviously inclined that way. People observing the election, though, need to understand something. That only 9% of Americans have voted for either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton thus far. 9%.
So that leaves 91% reluctance or not knowing.
Feeling that this or that candidate has this or that inadequacy on both sides of the aisle. And so that's why this narrative has been so volatile. It's not clear, it's not played out quite yet. It will continue to be volatile.
Do you think the coming president of the United States, whoever it is going to change the face of America or the face of the world in that case? Is it that radical?
I think America has a first order responsibility to ourselves so that our own internal dynamics remain strong, so that we can be in partnership with Egypt and other countries who we consider to be friends and allies based upon the values proposition. You can't overextend yourself while your internal systems are weak. We have some internal weaknesses economically. For instance, one of the things that Donald Trump has done quite successfully is tap into this deep, deep resentment, this deep anxiety, this anger that exists in American society among many people who feel like they've been left out of the economic and political and cultural settlement. In fact, that's the basis, even though he won't articulate it like that, that's the basis of his campaign. On the other side, you have Hillary Clinton pulling forward a more traditional model of governance, and this is clashing. And so the outcome of that is not clear. I wish they would listen to me. I think I try to be clear.
You should have been running for president. But I mean, the current administration is leaving the coming administration in a very hard position in so many issues.
Particularly internationally, and internally back home.
Internally, I mean, the Obamacare...
I actually proposed something to my own constituents. I write a weekly email to my constituents, as best we can, on various policy issues. And a little while back, I proposed some changes in the nature of governance. One of which was to go to a one-term presidency, 1 6-year term, rather than 2 4-year terms. Because if you go back historically and you look at it, President Obama swept into office. Now, he's on the other side of political aisle than me, so that should give you indication of where I stand. But he had a broad and deep appeal to people looking for change, looking for something new. But look at the second term, more difficulty, more turmoil. President Bush, again, having had 9/11 cast upon him, changing the whole nature of his presidency. And then the second term, of course, getting more and more difficult. The same thing happened to President Clinton, President Reagan.
So it's always the second term.
The second term is very tumultuous and difficult. So I proposed the change to our Constitution. You get one term. That way you don't have to worry about running for re-election. You're not spending an inordinate amount of time running around the country politicking for years. You're attending to the affairs of the nation.
But I mean, if you make a wrong choice, you'll be stuck with the president for 6 years instead of 4.
That's correct. But look how often we don't change the president after 4. So that's another consideration. People seem to like that idea generally. I proposed a sort of a term, but they said, why didn't you propose the same term limit for Congress? They shot right back at me.
Would you?
Well, one of the reasons that I didn't is that we run every 2 years. We have a much more proximate relationship to the people, and that's been designed purposefully to be held accountable. It would be less painful to have to run more often, maybe with even a shorter amount of time, or less often even with a shorter amount of time. But as my wife said, it's good that you're accountable to the people. You should interview my wife. I mean,
is she around?
She's not here.
She's not. Next time, I mean, you should bring in the whole family. You believe in the power of family, don't you?
Well, I have been blessed with 5 beautiful daughters.
Wow.
One of my Egyptian friends last night said, any man who has 3 daughters goes straight to heaven. So I said, I have 5.
So you go twice. You go for 2 terms. You got 5 daughters and a wife.
Right. And so we have a lot of fun in our house. It's not without normal family issues. But I'm extraordinarily proud and feel so gifted to have these beautiful children and a very considerate wife who empowers me to do things like this by her generosity and sacrifice of being back home.
When we hear about somebody with 5 daughters, we all with so many blessings from God, we say, MashaAllah, which is, may God
Thanks
bless
be
all
to God.
that. Yeah.
Wonderful.
All right, just before we go, I mean, you've already met a number of senior officials, including the Minister of Defense, Minister of Finance, yesterday the MPs, and you're meeting still with the President Sisi. Quickly, your impressions about your meetings and what do you think, what do you anticipate for your meeting with the President?
Initial impressions, first of all, a deep, deep sense of gratitude that I came, which is very gratifying for me. A very genuine, authentic welcome by the various ministries I've seen. A prioritization of this visit by me, and I'm very happy about that because, again, I feel my early formation by you can lend something to the very questions that you have asked me. How do we refresh this relationship? How do the people on the street know that there are friends of Egypt out there who very much value this relationship? That even in a family that has certain tensions, nonetheless, the term ahlan wa sahlan, which I have heard, means welcome to the family and the valley of prosperity, as I understand it. I love that term, ahlan wa sahlan. Right.
Tomorrow, meeting with the President.
Very excited to meet with the President. Again, I think the President has made a number of very courageous statements. These are not well publicized, sadly. I think they ought to be. I hope that Egypt, again, regains its position so that these types of statements actually have the impact they ought to be having. And at the same time, there needs to be an internal effort here to showcase what the President is trying to say. Some of the, again, very sacrificial comments that he's making that shatters the paradigms, but is built upon the solid foundation of strong leadership in the sense of pursuing that which is good and that which is just. I hope to have a variety of conversations beyond, again, the normal things we talk about in terms of the proper role our military cooperation is playing, how we strengthen economic ties, but to this greater values proposition, which, again, the President himself has shown willingness to engage in. I think that's important. I hope that, again, my own small contribution affirms his ambitions in this regard.
It certainly does. Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. We're looking forward for you to come back with the family, maybe in Christmas or so, come to Sharm el-Sheikh or come to Cairo. We'd be more than happy to tell you, ahlan wa sahlan.
Shukran.
Thank you. كونجرسمان جيف فوتنبري يعني قدم لنا صورة بشكل عام عن هو شايف مصر ازاي كراجل عاش او جه مصر اكتر من مرة. اتكلمنا على علاقات اقتصادية وسياسية، اتكلمنا على المنطقة، اتكلمنا عن العالم. اكيد مش كل حاجة من اللي قالها حضراتكم متفقين عليها او معاها، ولكن في الكثير من النقاط الايجابية اللي احنا محتاجين اننا نتحاور مع المزيد من الدبلوماسيين والسياسيين والمواطنين الامريكيين والاوروبيين وغيرهم من العالم. حوارات تبقى متزايدة، نسمع منهم ويسمعوا مننا، لان هذا هو السبيل الوحيد عشان خاطر نقدر نبني حالة من حالات الدعم لمصر مع كل خطوة صعبة بتاخدها مصر للإصلاح، سواء كان إصلاح سياسي أو اقتصادي.